From arrest to Rikers, the 72-hour pipeline that breaks the innocent. At 2:14 a.m. on a cold Tuesday in Queens, a 19-year-old named Darius Miles sits in a holding cell that smells faintly of bleach and wet concrete. He has not been convicted of anything. He has not seen a judge. He has not slept. And yet the system around him already presumes his guilt, not through malice but through design. In 72 hours, this design will move him from a sidewalk arrest to the gates of Rikers Island. It is not the speed that matters, it is the inevitability. Each door opens by law, each form signed in accordance with policy, each step validated by procedure, and together they form an assembly line whose product is despair. The question is not why Rikers Island is violent. The question is how an innocent person becomes its raw material. Between arrest and incarceration lies a bureaucratic corridor that few understand. It is only 3 days long, but it is the most decisive stage in the life of a New York City detainee. The 72-hour pipeline determines who sees freedom and who vanishes into pretrial detention, often for years. This investigation reconstructs that process as both machine and maze. It exposes how paperwork, policy, and pressure synchronize to convert human beings into case numbers. The thesis is simple, forensic, and devastating. The system does not malfunction, it performs exactly as built. The 72-hour pipeline is not an accident of inefficiency, it is the architecture of control disguised as due process. Every journey to Rikers begins on a street corner. When an arresting officer says, "Turn around, hands behind your back," the 72-hour clock starts. This first phase is field custody, regulated by NYPD Patrol Guide 208-03. Officially, it is about safety and identification. In practice, it is about compression, the suspect's world shrinking to the dimensions of a steel cuff. Inside the squad car, body camera footage continues to roll. The evidence system has already generated an event number. The paperwork begins before the detainee arrives at the precinct. By minute 12, fingerprints are scanned. By minute 30, the electronic arrest worksheet is uploaded to the centralized ECAB, Early Case Assessment Bureau. Every line of data moves faster than the person it describes. The precinct is not built for rest. Fluorescent lighting remains on 24 hours a day to prevent sleeping. The benches are steel, slatted to ensure discomfort. From an anthropological view, this environment performs a ritual of submission. It dismantles autonomy through minor deprivation. The suspect waits for the desk appearance ticket that rarely arrives, or for transport to central booking, which always does. The median waiting time between arrest and arraignment in New York City is 26 hours. During this period, defendants have no access to legal counsel, minimal access to phones, and no way to manage outside responsibilities. Jobs evaporate. Childcare collapses. The punishment begins before the trial. At Manhattan's 100 Center Street, the pipeline narrows. Hundreds of detainees cycle through holding pens that connect directly to the courthouse basement. Here, bureaucracy becomes geography, a concrete labyrinth of intake rooms, digital scanners, and sealed elevators. Technically, every detainee must be arraigned within 24 hours. In reality, weekends, holidays, and administrative backlog extend that deadline into 48 or 72. This is the first structural breach between law as ideal and law as practice. Central booking functions like an industrial plant. Police deliver raw material, prosecutors receive it, judges finalize distribution. At every interface, data replaces identity. Mugshots overwrite names, charges overwrite context, and probability overwrites presumption of innocence. By hour 30, the decision has shifted from officers to algorithms. The supervised release program, adopted citywide after 2016, uses statistical models to predict failure to appear. The intention was reformist, reduce cash bail. The result is actuarial justice, a math-based morality where the poor and the unknown score higher risk. In the courtroom, prosecutors cite public safety concerns. Judges, constrained by time, rely on bail tables. Defense attorneys, often public defenders juggling 70 cases, have minutes to argue. The courtroom moves at industrial pace, one arraignment every 90 seconds. The human being becomes throughput. Anthropologically, this stage mirrors a marketplace. Freedom has price tags. Those who can afford bail purchase time. Those who cannot are processed downstream to Rikers. Once bail is denied or unaffordable, custody transfers to the Department of Correction. Detainees are loaded into transport vans, windowless, steel-plated, temperature-controlled by neglect. The route is only 8 miles long from Queens to the East River crossing. Yet to the human body inside, it may as well be intercontinental. The vehicle's design restricts perception. No horizon, no clock, only motion. Sensory deprivation begins before arrival. As they cross the Rikers Island Bridge, the skyline of Manhattan fades into gray haze. Each mile erases presumption of innocence and replaces it with administrative reality. By the time the van stops, detainees are no longer defendants. They are inventory. Inside the island's Eric M. Taylor Center, the clock restarts under a different authority. Every detainee undergoes medical screening, property inventory, and psychological evaluation. Each process is fragmented, different forms, different staff, same exhaustion. From a systems engineering view, this fragmentation is deliberate. Redundancy ensures compliance, not comfort. The intake officers work in shifts too short for empathy, too long for error. A 2019 DOJ report noted that detainees spend an average of 18 hours in intake before assignment. Some wait 40. The report's language, unavoidable logistical constraints, is bureaucratic code for human saturation. The final stage in the 72-hour pipeline is classification. Software called CIS, Correctional Information System, cross-references prior arrests, gang affiliations, and behavioral flags to assign housing. But CIS cannot measure trauma, vulnerability, or innocence. It categorizes bodies, not minds. Innocent defendants, first-time detainees, and petty offense arrestees often share cells with hardened repeat offenders. Risk disperses downward. The anthropological insight is chilling. The classification system does not distinguish guilt, it distributes exposure. At hour 71, Darius Miles receives his housing slip. He will share a dorm with 38 men, most awaiting trial for violent felonies. He still has not been convicted. His paperwork is clean, his psyche is not. Why does the system tolerate this? Because statistically it is efficient. The 72-hour pipeline processes roughly 100,000 detainees a year. Its throughput rate determines the workload of every adjacent agency: courts, prosecutors, public defenders, and jail staff. Any slowdown threatens institutional stability. The system's priority is not justice but continuity. From a bureaucratic standpoint, innocence is a variable without value. The machine cannot account for moral data, it measures only volume and velocity. This is how the innocent are broken, not by intent but by inertia. The modern pipeline emerged from the broken windows policing era of the 1990s. The theory: minor offenses demand immediate consequence. The infrastructure that supported it, precinct cells, central booking, Rikers, remains unchanged even as the policy ideology has shifted. Reform laws, Bail Reform Act of 2019, Raise the Age Law of 2017, have altered criteria but not tempo. The ritual endures. The 72-hour pipeline is less a policy than a tradition, a civic reflex that outlived its justification. From arrest to assignment, three forces govern the process. Spatial compression. The arrested person's world physically contracts from sidewalk to cell. Temporal distortion. Hours lose sequence. Sleep and hunger dismantle cognition. Administrative abstraction. Human identity dissolves into forms, numbers, and risk scores. These are not side effects. They are design features, rituals of depersonalization that ensure compliance. At the end of 72 hours, the system has achieved its hidden goal: transforming a citizen into a detainee who no longer questions why. By the time a detainee reaches Rikers Island, the system's transformation is complete. What began as a single interaction between officer and citizen has evolved into a networked process. Each institution validating the previous one, each decision laundering the next. This is the hidden efficiency of the 72-hour pipeline: distributed accountability. No single agency owns the outcome. Every failure is procedural success somewhere else. The NYPD arrests to protect the public. The prosecutors arraign to uphold statute. The court remands to preserve order. The Department of Correction detains to maintain security. Each link functions rationally in isolation, and irrationally in totality. This is what sociologist Robert Jackall called the moral ecology of bureaucracy. In that ecology, guilt is irrelevant. Process itself becomes the moral act. At the precinct booking desk, the first data entry decides trajectory. A single box checked, resisting arrest, outstanding warrant, uncooperative, can shift a suspect from desk appearance to full remand. Once entered, these descriptors harden into evidence. Even if unproven, they shape bail hearings, risk assessments, and housing decisions. The anthropological implication is stark. the metadata of accusation becomes more powerful than truth. In modern policing, paperwork is prophecy. In theory, prosecutors act as filters, declining weak cases. In practice, the Early Case Assessment Bureau operates under production metrics. Each assistant district attorney must review dozens of cases per shift. The incentive structure favors movement, not scrutiny. The decision to file charges formalizes the defendant's descent into the system. From this moment on, withdrawal becomes bureaucratically more difficult than continuation. This inertia, known internally as forward processing, means that dismissing a charge requires more effort, more paperwork, and more justification than allowing it to proceed. Thus, bureaucratic physics favors detention over release. Bail reform was intended to reduce unnecessary incarceration, but it exposed an uncomfortable truth. Without monetary leverage, the courts rely on predictive algorithms. These models analyze data from past cases, age, residence stability, prior arrests, to assign a risk of non-appearance score. But data is not neutral, it reflects the policing geography of the city. Neighborhoods under heavier surveillance produce higher statistical risk. Thus, the algorithm reproduces inequality through mathematical precision. It becomes, in effect, an automated bias amplifier, confirming the prejudices that policing data already encodes. The paradox is complete. In the name of fairness, the system replaced cache bias with coded bias. Every arraignment courtroom in New York runs like a production floor. Defendants appear in groups. Public defenders meet clients for the first time moments before. The goal is not understanding but throughput. From a systems design perspective, this is flow optimization. Judges, clerks, and attorneys synchronize motions to prevent bottlenecks. The docket must move. To the observer, this pace appears efficient. To the accused, it feels like ritualized indifference. One anthropologist who studied Brooklyn arraignment courts in 2018 described it as bureaucratic theater. A performance where everyone knows their lines and truth is incidental to schedule. Once transferred to Rikers, the detainee enters a self-contained ecosystem. The island's layout is not random, it is a spatial expression of administrative logic. The Eric M. Taylor Center (EMTC) processes new arrivals. The Otis Bantam Correctional Center (OBCC) houses general population. The George R. Vierno Center (GRVC) contains high-risk detainees. Each facility represents a distinct level of control, yet all share the same architectural DNA. Narrow corridors, double security doors, segmented sightlines. The design enforces two simultaneous illusions: surveillance for staff, invisibility for detainees. Every wall hides a human. Every sound is institutional noise. This environment does not punish, it erodes. Time is the real instrument of coercion. At any given moment, thousands of pretrial detainees at Rikers are waiting. For medical clearance, for housing, for a court date that keeps shifting. In the 2022 Board of Correction report, the median stay for a pretrial detainee was 115 days, even though half of those detainees would later see their charges dismissed or reduced. This administrative waiting functions as soft punishment. The system does not need to convict, it simply withholds conclusion. Psychologists who studied detainees found that prolonged uncertainty triggered physiological stress responses equal to those seen in combat veterans. This is not metaphor, it is measurable trauma. Each stage of the pipeline generates economic dependence. Police overtime budgets rely on arrest volume. Court staff positions depend on arraignment throughput. Correctional staffing levels are justified by inmate population. This network of incentives ensures stability through dysfunction. Reducing arrests or detention would destabilize entire bureaucratic hierarchies. Thus, the system resists efficiency improvements, it survives by expanding its own necessity. In economic terms, Rikers is both symptom and subsidy. The flow of detainees sustains public sector employment, private contracts, and political narratives of order. Within 72 hours, the human subject transitions through at least 5 distinct environments: street, precinct, booking, courtroom, transport, and intake. Each has its own sensory logic: lighting, sound, smell, authority. The cumulative effect is disorientation. Clinical psychologists describe this as environmental vertigo, a sustained loss of orientation that mimics the early stages of trauma response. By the time detainees reach Rikers, their perceptual systems are already compromised. This vulnerability makes adaptation easier for the institution. Broken people are compliant people. The pipeline does not only move bodies, it conditions minds. At multiple points, oversight exists in name. Supervisors sign off on arrests. Judges review probable cause. Medical staff conduct intake screenings. But each review is procedural, not substantive. Supervision becomes ritual confirmation, a performance of accountability that reinforces legitimacy rather than questioning it. Anthropologists refer to this as ritualized verification, where oversight functions as a moral shield for the system itself. By repeating the ritual of review, the bureaucracy convinces itself of its humanity. In 2014, a city audit found that over 80% of Rikers detainees were held on misdemeanors or technical parole violations. Many spent more time waiting for trial than the maximum sentence of their charge. One example, cited in a 2018 appellate review, involved a man charged with turnstile jumping who spent 101 days on Rikers before dismissal. The report noted, "No malice, only backlog." That phrase, "no malice, only backlog," encapsulates the pipeline's moral framework. Harm without hatred. Cruelty by routine. The 72-hour pipeline disproportionately consumes people with mental illness, addiction, and homelessness. Police are the de facto first responders for crises of poverty. Every arrest for trespassing or public disturbance funnels the vulnerable into a system designed for containment, not care. Once inside, the structure magnifies pathology. Those who arrive unstable often deteriorate within days. Medical staff report spikes in self-harm during intake, a direct correlation with deprivation of sleep and sensory overload. The term used internally is adjustment incidents. Outside the bureaucracy, we would call them breakdowns. The 2019 Bail Reform Act was celebrated as a step toward decarceration. But its implementation was followed by a spike in political backlash. Media narratives of dangerous releases pressured lawmakers to roll back provisions. The result? A half measure, enough to alter appearances, not enough to alter outcomes. Courts regained discretion to detain under vague public safety justifications. The algorithm remained, the culture persisted. Anthropologically, reform became a ritual of moral renewal, a way for society to feel progress while preserving function. If the pipeline were a mind, its dominant cognitive trait would be compartmentalization. Each agency operates under local logic, blind to the total picture. The police measure arrests. The courts measure clearances. The jails measure headcounts. No one measures justice achieved per human processed. This absence of holistic cognition allows the system to persist indefinitely. It is not evil, it is unthinking. The machine has no moral center, only procedural gravity. 15. The cycle of return. Of those released from Rikers, nearly 60% are rearrested within 2 years. Recidivism is not failure, it is design feedback. Each reentry feeds the legitimacy of the system that processed them. The 72-hour pipeline is therefore circular, not linear. Its efficiency depends on repetition. Every arrest justifies the last. Every reoffense validates the architecture that ensures more arrests. This is how institutions become self-perpetuating ecosystems, by consuming the outcomes they produce. Officers, prosecutors, and judges rarely see the whole picture. Each acts within structural limitations: time, caseload, policy. Over years, this creates emotional fatigue. Empathy becomes unprofitable. This is not corruption but cultural drift. Indifference becomes an adaptive behavior, a shield against systemic futility. As one retired correctional officer described in testimony, "It's not that we don't care. It's that caring breaks you faster than the inmates do." Thus, the moral economy of Rikers is sustained not by cruelty, but by emotional triage. The 72-hour pipeline is often imagined as confined to Rikers. In truth, it begins in every neighborhood subjected to concentrated policing. Every NYPD precinct functions as an intake valve for the same process. The map of arrests mirrors the map of poverty. Rikers Island is not an isolated failure, it is the physical expression of urban inequality. To understand the island, one must understand the city that feeds it. 18. The sociology of abandonment. Urban theorist Loic Wacant coined the term carceral continuum. It describes the overlap between welfare systems and penal systems, how social neglect transforms into criminalization. In New York, budget cuts to mental health, housing, and education correlate directly with spikes in low-level arrests. The 72-hour pipeline functions as the catch basin for every other institutional shortfall. Rikers is not merely a jail, it is the city's unconscious, a storage site for unresolved failures. Public debate oscillates between closure and reform. Yet both positions assume continuity of control. Even if Rikers is replaced by smaller borough-based facilities, the 72-hour pipeline will remain intact unless its logic changes. In this sense, the crisis is not architectural but philosophical. The problem is not where we cage people, it is why we built a system that requires cages to function. At hour 72, the transformation is complete. The accused becomes the detained becomes data. Outside, families begin the cycle of calls, bail loans, and hope. Inside, the system continues to hum, indifferent, self-sustaining, legal. The anthropological truth is this. The 72-hour pipeline does not merely transport people to Rikers, it manufactures the kind of person Rikers requires to exist. The next stage, the repercussions, will examine what happens beyond the island, the societal echo of a process that breaks the innocent to preserve the illusion of justice. When the gates at Rikers close, the city forgets. For the system, the detainee becomes a number in a daily population report. For the person, the 72-hour descent continues long after the clock stops. Families begin a parallel journey, calling hotlines, checking the inmate locator, searching for a lawyer who answers the phone. Each delay becomes another kind of punishment, slow motion, bureaucratic, yet intimate. Anthropologically, this is the echo phase, the period when administrative violence diffuses into the civilian world. The family absorbs the shock. The community absorbs the absence. The system absorbs the profit. Pretrial detention is not legally punishment, yet it functions exactly as such. People held at Rikers lose employment, housing, and custody. Even if acquitted, the system leaves them with a record of exposure, a mark that outlives innocence. In 2021, an audit by the New York City Comptroller found that over 80% of Rikers detainees had not been convicted of a crime. Yet those same detainees faced the same risks: assault, isolation, and psychological breakdown. The sociological consequence is what scholars call the invisible sentence. Punishment without conviction. A lifelong penalty for passing through the system's machinery. Every stage of the pipeline extracts value. Private contractors supply transport, food, and uniforms. Medical vendors charge per screening. Even phone calls from jail, 15 minutes at nearly $3, generate revenue. For-profit bail loan companies prey on families who cannot afford to wait. Legal bond agents operate in parallel economies with predatory interest rates. The cost of surviving innocence is monetized at every step. In this sense, Rikers Island is not simply a correctional facility, it is an economic organism. Its arteries are contracts, its lifeblood is volume. A reduction in detainees is not a success story, it is a budget crisis. By the time the wrongly accused are released, the internal architecture of their minds has changed. Clinical studies from 2019 and 2022 documented persistent symptoms among short-term detainees. Hypervigilance, disrupted circadian rhythms, impaired trust in authority, and cognitive numbing. One participant described it simply. You start thinking like you're still inside even when the doors open. From a psychological standpoint, this is institutional imprinting, the mind adapting to confinement as the default environment. Even freedom feels hostile afterward. Every arrest sends a signal through families. Children learn that justice is a matter of luck. Parents learn that innocence is fragile. These lessons compound into cultural memory. Sociologists studying Rikers demographics describe inherited distrust, a generational pattern where communities disengage from civic systems because they associate them with harm. The result is a paradox. Neighborhoods most surveilled by police are also the least protected by law. Safety becomes conditional, not universal. The 72-hour pipeline thus produces not only detainees but disbelievers, citizens alienated from the promise of justice itself. The American criminal system operates under a theological assumption that every interaction with law enforcement is evidence of moral failure. This belief sustains itself even in the face of data showing systemic error. In 2020 alone, more than 9,000 New Yorkers had charges dismissed after detention. Yet in public perception, arrest equals guilt. The bureaucracy reinforces this theology. Every document, from intake sheet to court transcript, presumes wrongdoing. Forms require reasons for arrest, not evidence of innocence. Over time, paperwork becomes scripture. Its mere existence sanctifies the process. Faith in due process erodes quietly. The public defender system, overburdened and underfunded, struggles to embody constitutional ideals. Judges, constrained by caseloads, begin to view expedience as fairness. When justice becomes a matter of logistics, ethics become optional. This erosion has measurable effects. lower jury participation rates, declining trust in police, and voter apathy toward judicial reform. In democratic societies, legitimacy is a shared hallucination. When belief fades, only coercion remains. Rikers Island is the visible monument to that fading faith. The 72-hour pipeline is not confined to the jail. It is an algorithm that runs on the city itself. Its data inputs are poverty, race, and geography. Its outputs are incarceration, trauma, and recidivism. Every neighborhood with underfunded schools and over-policed streets contributes raw material to the system. The line between social service and criminal processing blurs. Homelessness, addiction, and mental illness are reclassified as offenses because the city has nowhere else to put them. The anthropological term for this is carceral substitution, the replacement of welfare with containment. It is not just a policy failure, it is a design choice. Every bureaucracy justifies its own existence through crisis. For Rikers, the crisis is overcrowding; for the courts, backlog; for the NYPD, crime spikes. Each institution relies on the other's dysfunction to secure funding. When reformers propose change, the system responds with complexity. Pilot programs, task forces, and oversight committees proliferate, not to solve the problem but to manage it indefinitely. The structure thus achieves dynamic equilibrium, perpetual motion without progress. Politicians invoke Rikers not as a shame but as proof of control. During election cycles, promises to fix or close the island translate into moral theater. Reform becomes rhetoric, then dissolves under budget realities. Meanwhile, headlines about crime drive funding for policing and detention. Fear is not a byproduct. It is the commodity. The sociological outcome is a feedback loop. Fear sustains incarceration, incarceration sustains fear. The system feeds on its own mythology. Behind every processed detainee are thousands of workers. Officers, clerks, drivers, nurses, janitors. Each performs a fragment of justice without seeing the whole. To them, the system is simply work, punctual, procedural, and often thankless. Anthropologically, this division of moral labor diffuses guilt. It creates what philosopher Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, not sadism but function. No one believes they are harming anyone. Everyone believes they are keeping order. And in the arithmetic of order, empathy becomes inefficiency. The vocabulary of justice, rehabilitation, reform, accountability, has been hollowed by repetition. Inside the bureaucracy, those words serve administrative purposes, not moral ones. To reform means to shuffle procedures. To rehabilitate means to process faster. When language detaches from meaning, policy becomes liturgy, recited, not believed. Efforts to shut down Rikers have been ongoing since 2017. The official plan, known as the Borough-Based Jails Initiative, aims to replace it with smaller facilities by 2027. But even city planners acknowledge that closure is a logistical rebranding. The same pipeline will continue to feed into different buildings. Architectural reform without philosophical reform is set dressing. The performance changes, the script does not. The deeper failure lies in imagination. Society cannot yet conceive of justice without cages. The pattern is not unique to New York. Globally, pretrial detention has become the largest category of incarceration. In Brazil, India, and the Philippines, overcrowded jails function as holding zones for people never convicted. The same logic applies. Risk management replaces presumption of innocence. What New York perfected is scale. A bureaucratic machine capable of transforming liberty into liability with administrative precision. Rikers Island, then, is not an anomaly, it is a prototype. From an anthropological standpoint, the 72-hour pipeline operates as a modern rite of passage. It redefines social status through ritualized humiliation, arrest, processing, confinement, release. Like initiation ceremonies in traditional societies, it strips identity to reconstruct obedience. But unlike those rituals, it offers no reintegration, only stigma. The system transforms individuals into manageable data points. Control masquerades as order, degradation masquerades as justice. Inside government reports, the language remains neutral. Case management efficiency, custody turnover, population reduction goals. Neutrality is the bureaucracy's armor. To sound human would require acknowledging harm. Yet even in official documentation, cracks appear. Phrases like unintended consequences, unavoidable delays, detainee distress. These are the system's subconscious leaks, tiny admissions that procedure cannot mask pain forever. Those released after dismissal rarely return to normal life. Background checks flag their arrest history. Employers read the record, not the verdict. Housing applications are denied. The city labels them formerly incarcerated, though many were never convicted. Innocence becomes unprovable once contaminated by the pipeline. This is the ultimate irony. A justice system that can exonerate legally but never socially. In a functioning democracy, law should restrain the state, not the citizen. But the 72-hour pipeline reverses that relationship. It allows the state to act first and justify later. In this inversion, the burden of proof shifts invisibly, from prosecution to person. Every detainee becomes their own evidence. The process is legal, the outcome is unjust. This distinction, between legality and morality, is where the American justice system hides its deepest flaw. Reform tends to focus on logistics. More judges, better data, newer facilities. But these are cosmetic changes. The core question remains untouched. Why must justice depend on suffering to appear legitimate? Until that question is addressed, every new initiative will replicate the same logic under a different name. Rikers may close. The 72-hour pipeline will endure. The final sound of the 72 hours is not the slam of a cell door, but the quiet scratch of a pen. An officer signing a release. A clerk filing a dismissal. A case closed. But the person behind the paperwork carries the silence home, the residue of process disguised as fairness. The anthropologist who studies this silence does not need to ask what justice looks like. They need only listen to the rhythm of forms being stamped, one after another, in perfect bureaucratic time. The system does not break the innocent by mistake. It breaks them because that is the function we have assigned to it. Fade to black.